Now, it's my privilege to welcome to the airwaves this morning my good friend Wendy Francis from the Australian Christian Lobby. Great to catch up with you, Wendy. How are you?
I'm very well, Matt, and it's nice to be called your good friend because I just have so much respect for you over so many years. So thank you for having me on.
Well, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you on a Monday morning. And I know that you have been to the movies to see a very powerful new movie that's actually came out in cinemas called Sound of Freedom. I'd love to get your take on it, Wendy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was powerful. The first thing I'd say is I was grateful that there was nothing gratuitous, because there are some people, I think, who might be holding back going because it's confronting. Yes, it is confronting, but there was nothing gratuitous in it. There was no like sex scenes or things like that you would have to look away from. I really appreciated that. It was very sensitive, but boy, oh boy, it was hard hitting, and it really brought home the fact that we today are in a situation where there is more trafficking than there has been in the past, even when it was legal, Matt. And it was hard not to have your heart actually really pulled out and pushed back in at times when you saw children being affected in that way. It was very powerful. And our prayer, I guess, is that it will create this Wilberforce moment that many people are saying it will, because there are some horrific things happening today that we can be part of.
And when you talk about a Wilberforce moment, of course, we're talking about William Wilberforce, the famous UK politician who led the charge for the abolition of slavery. And, you know, I watched the movie with my wife over a week ago now, and I just remember I was just gutted. Like, for 2 hours afterwards, I just was, you know, walking around the house going, oh, my goodness, that was heavy. That was heavy. But, you know, I just really think it needs to be a conversation we have, particularly in the Christian world, in Christian media. You know, I remember going to Cambodia and Thailand and visiting Destiny Rescue, a great Aussie charity that's based over there. And I remember going to an orphanage where these young girls, had been rescued from the slave trade. And, you know, they made me a coffee, some Anzac bickies, and I saw that they were sewing ballet dresses for a Brisbane ballet company. They had been given a job that they can, you know, get their life on track. And they've literally been rescued from one of the most wicked, evil things you can imagine. We need to highlight the heart behind this movie, don't we, Wendy?
We really do. And we can't then just think that it's a third world problem, because it's a problem here in our own nation as well. And more the Australian Federal Police are highlighting raids that they are having on particularly brothels and places like that down the Gold Coast, and lots of different areas around Australia where they are busting up trafficking rings. But it's not just trafficking, because the trafficking is fed by stuff that goes on that we often whitewash. And when I say that, I'm talking about particularly pornography and prostitution. And we have governments and legislation that actually allows this evil stuff to exist, and not only exist, to flourish. And so we need to highlight the fact that trafficking would not exist without legislative agreement that we can have pornography and prostitution in the way that we have it. And so, you know, this is really important that people who are listening gather that this is not just a third world problem. This is a problem that we have in Australia, and we can make a difference.
Absolutely. And Wendy, I heard Rod Hopping, who's helping distribute the movie in Australia on Vision during last week, and he said, it's even more powerful in that movie because Jim Caviezel is the guy that played Jesus in The Passion, one of the most brutal movies but most powerful movies ever created. And there's a scene where Jim Caviezel, who's playing Tom Ballard, the guy that's the movie's about, it's based on a true story, and there's a scene where Jim Caviezel says, God's children are not for sale. And Rod said it's like Jesus is saying it because he played Jesus in The Passion. And it's so, you know, I mean, you know, the Bible's very clear, Wendy, isn't it? You know, anyone who causes any of these little ones to stumble, it's like a millstone's hung around their neck and they're thrown to the bottom of the ocean. We need to proclaimed that it's God's heart to rescue these children, to protect these children, to speak up and advocate for children all over the world. And thank God that there are many great charities doing that, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. And the movie even repeats that verse that you just said at one stage when he's catching the guy who is about to sell a child to him, which is just horrendous. And he says that very verse. But we need to understand that this relates. So sadly, there are people sitting in churches today who are caught up with pornography. Now, behind every pornographic image, there is a victim. And we're particularly talking about children here, but we are talking about children and mainly women. And there are victims behind every pornographic image. And so we've got to realise that we can't just whitewash what actually feeds into sex trafficking. But, yeah, look, I encourage people to go and see the movie, but not just to see the movie, but to relate it to our everyday operations of what's happening in Australia right now. And so, for instance, ACL are running campaigns to try and stop pornographic books being on library shelves for children, and they're there. We're trying to make outdoor advertising be suitable for children's viewing, because we're seeing more and more outdoor advertising, but advertising as you walk through a shopping mall, that it's actually quite pornographic for children, and it's leading them down this path. And, when it comes to prostitution, we're seeing state governments around the nation actually make prostitution easier to access, rather than saying, hang on a minute, God's children are not for sale, whether that means children as in age, or women particularly, or guys as well. But the main victims in prostitution are children and women.
And I'm always curious to know what the latest is with prostitution laws. What's the latest in Queensland right now?
Well, Queensland has just been through the most horrendous week last week, because the Queensland government, anyone who lives in Queensland or is watching the news, they've been talking for a long time about putting through child protection bills, and they're including some pretty radical bills that would put children into prison, really. And so there's been a lot of pushback on these laws anyway. But when they actually brought the laws in, there was like dozens of amendments that actually put into these laws, and bizarrely, absolutely bizarrely, they included prostitution legislation amendments in the Child Protection Act. And of course, the Queensland government has complete control. There is no upper house, there's no Senate house in our state. That's the only state that's the case in Queensland. And so it just went straight through. But what it's actually done is actually allowed the act of prostitution on street corners free access. It's been the most horrendous thing. And even the Greens, like the Greens and the opposition, were just like, what are you doing? How can you actually include all of this in the Child Protection Act? But it's actually decriminalised street soliciting. So we're really pushing back on this, because there will be more to come. But it's not just in Queensland, it's in South Australia as well, constantly wanting to push back on prostitution laws, constantly in Western Australia as well. And what we're doing is actually giving a free license to pimps and to sex buyers, but we are giving no thought to the women and children caught up as victims in prostitution.
Well, we need to be speaking up about this in Queensland. And I was actually at a fundraiser night last week with David Crisafulli and Rob Mulhook, Tim Mander. There are some good Christian MPs there. Fiona Simpson, I know they're speaking up for these things. And there's probably going to be a change in government. Do you think, I think it's about 16 months away, is it, Wendy? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's October next year, and look, at the moment, the current government, which is the Labor government, is really on the nose, and it has been in power in Queensland for a very long time. They have become very arrogant, and just the display this week of including prostitution laws in the Child Protection Act, I just, honestly, it blows my mind. It's bizarre, and so it's just an indication of how very, very confident they are that they can do whatever they like. Yeah, it's hubris in the highest degree. It's on steroids, to be honest. So it is very concerning. And yes, there are some really good politicians, and we're grateful for them, and we need to pray for them because it's not an easy place to be.
Absolutely, well said. Now, crossing over to WA, there's some abortion legislation reform. What's the latest there?
So it's basically abortion to birth for any reason, including psychosocial reasons, that has been passed by the lower house. So they have the two-house system, which is the same in every state apart from Queensland. And so we are really hoping, and there are, again, some very good politicians over there. I'm thinking of Nick Goran, for instance, and people will recognise his name, but there's many good ones over there. So what we're pushing for is amendments to what they've put through in the lower house. So it's not yet gone through because it has to go to the upper house. But basically what they have passed in the lower house is abortion to birth for any reason. One of the things that is particularly concerning is that they have made sure that even under 16-year-olds do not have to get parental permission to have an abortion. So a child can go and have an abortion without their parent even really knowing. And the AMA are concerned about that. The AMA are also concerned that you can get approval for an abortion under this proposed legislation, even from a doctor on the phone who's interstate. So not even aware of your own particular circumstances. So the sort of things that are on the cards now for the upper house are legislation that will ban gender selection abortions. We know that that is a growing problem, and particularly for girl babies, that any baby born alive will receive the same care and treatment as would be provided to any baby born in a premature state, mandatory considerations for counselling services, mandatory pain relief. So there's a number of amendments, including not being able to immediately refer somebody for an abortion if they are detected that they might have a baby with Down syndrome, which again is happening as well. So as I say, the AMA have concerns about this bill. We certainly have a lot of concerns about this bill. People like Nick Goran are going to push back on it, and that's a wonderful thing. But we really need to pray, because when we open the door to this sort of free killing of babies, a darkness comes upon the soul of our state, and there's just no other way to put it. We abort in Australia around 100,000 babies. We terminate their lives before they're even given a chance to grow. We abort 100,000 babies, and then, Matt, we're all in a lather because we're not going to have enough people working when we want superannuation. Because we've got an ageing population. Again, it's madness when we're actually killing the next generation, and then we're complaining because we've got an ageing population and we're not even regenerating enough to keep our population going. So there's when we turn against God's way, and when we adopt these dark ways of Satan, then it's very obvious that the whole wheels start falling off our society, and that's what's happening.
You know, Wendy, often when we talk on this subject, I'm reminded of a TV ad I saw. I think it aired in the US many years ago, but it was a pro-life ad, and it had, a female judge, and it had a male policeman, and then a female firefighter, and then a pastor, and different people. And it said, thank God my mum decided not to get an abortion. Thank God that they chose life, and then it said, every life is precious, and I just remember thinking, there's so much potential in every life. And that's why I love the ACL, speaking up for those who can't speak. So that's something we need to really be praying for WA, and for those in WA, I guess they can contact their local MPs to speak up about this.
Absolutely. We need as much outcry as possible. And so our State Director, Peter Abetz, who was formerly a Member of Parliament himself, he's working hard on this. So people in WA will know of Peter Abetz. Get in touch with him if you want to, but support people like Nick Garan, who are really working hard on getting these amendments through the upper house. And we believe we've got a really good chance of getting some of these amendments through. Not that long ago, we got some of these amendments through in South Australia, and New South Wales also we did get some amendments through, but particularly in South Australia, they have one of the best born alive bills that we have in the country. And so if a baby is born alive in South Australia, they receive the same treatment. So they receive even pain relief. So around the nation, there is no pain relief given to a baby born alive after an abortion, but they're left to die. In places like Queensland and Victoria and even other areas in Northern Territory, the law is very specific. You are not to give any life-sustaining treatment to a baby born alive after an abortion. It's quite barbaric. And so we're looking for Western Australia to certainly follow in the path of South Australian legislation. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all abortion was outlawed? That would be a wonderful day. But if we can get some of these amendments in, then we're clawing back some good ground.
Absolutely. Well, something very important to speak up about, and certainly to keep in our prayers. And I heard a little bit recently about the Misinformation and Disinformation laws, but I haven't heard the latest on that. Where's that at the moment, Wendy?
So it's still in discussion. So at the moment, there's just a discussion paper. So it hasn't reached the stage of being a bill. But if the discussion paper went through and became the law, then we would be shut down from saying anything that the government actually disagreed with. The government would become the arbiter of what is true and what is false. And so misinformation would be accidentally saying something that's not true, and that would be censored. Disinformation is purposefully saying something that is not true, and that would be censored. You don't need to go back very far in our recent history, during COVID even, to see the discussions that were had on different, even vaccination, but even some of the mandatory stuff that happened, and there was discussion on the social media platforms. Even then, some of that was shut down. This would give powers to the government and to Facebook and to all of the different social media platforms to shut down any conversation that they believed was misinformation or disinformation. So if I believe, as I do, that God created male and female and there are only two genders, that would go against what the government believes. And so that would be seen as either mis or disinformation. Now, I don't get fined for that under this legislation, but if it's on Facebook and they allow it to stay there, they get fined up to 5% of their annual turnover, which ends up being in the millions of dollars. And so the bad behaviour that I believe we have already allowed social platforms to do, and that is to shut down debate, that bad behaviour would actually now be mandatory for them. They would have to shut down anything that went against what the government says is true. Now, one of the carve-outs for this is that government information cannot be seen as misinformation or disinformation. So they get a free bill. Registered news media gets a free pass as well. And so you can see how easily the narrative is going to be very, very narrow as to what the government or news media believe is true. And if we say that marriage is between one man and one woman for life, and that's how we believe God flourishes as society, then that goes against the government narrative and will be exactly the sort of thing that is censored. So this is very concerning, and we're working really hard in that space as well. It hasn't come into law yet. It's still a discussion paper.
Well, we're so glad you brought that to our attention, Wendy. And as always, if people want to find out more, they can go to the ACL website, acl.org.au, or they can search up ACL on social media. You guys do such a great job making truth public, Wendy. As always on a Monday, it's great to catch up. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Matt. God bless you and God bless you all. Bye.
God bless.